All right, everyone, welcome to another episode of Line Your Own Pockets. We're recording this on a different than normal day, and that's going to lead into the story here. Because what we're going to talk about is having redundancies and everything for your trading. So, the day we were going to record this, I went and I dropped my kids off at daycare, and I come back, and there's no power. And I'm looking outside, and it's a pretty beautiful day for Canada. All things, and I'm like, what the heck's going on? We got no power. I could barely get on with my cell phone to even message Dave because everyone's probably trying to connect to the same tower at the same time, so that's impossible to use. And it turned out that randomly a bus backed into a telephone pole. And because I'm so rural, there's only one circuit for all of that. Knocked out our power entirely. I had to go all the way back to daycare to get the kids because they don't have power and we don't have water. We have wells and they need power to operate. So you
Yeah.
can't have 30, 50 kids in a building without being able to give them water. So a whole nightmare and a mess. And this kind of got me and Dave talking about a great idea for this podcast of making sure that you can operate whatever it is you're doing in your trading operation, even when just the most random, unexpected thing either takes you out or takes your technical setup out, knocks out your power, your internet, whatever it is.
Yeah, and there's so many things that can go wrong that you just can't imagine. So
Mm-hmm.
I remember, it's not really that important if you're not trading a lot and you're not making money. I mean, maybe sometimes for some traders, when the power goes out, that's a good thing. So because they don't trade. But when you start making money and, the people I work with, this is what they do for a living, the more important that is, and it kind of sneaks up on you because if as you scale up your trading, it becomes a more important topic as time goes on. So, and also eventually something is going to happen. Like it's not if, it's when. So it is something you need to be thinking about. And I've thought about this a lot over the years. So I've I've changed a little bit over the years with this topic, so I think it's a good one that we'll get into. So tell me, the first thing I asked you once you were able to connect was, okay,
Yeah.
do you have any trades on that you're unprotected or like?
Mhm.
So tell me how you think about that.
Well, right, as a swing trader, I always have trades on. Now, this all happened before the market, so in this instance, if it came to day trading, it wouldn't have been an issue because I wouldn't be able to place any or get any out. But as a swing trader, yeah, I've always got positions out there. But it does make you think of, your house is vulnerable to not having power at some point, right? And then also not having internet there as well. So even, I was thinking of, do I crank out the generator, right? Because that's one kind of backups that you should think of not only for your family, right, in event of power outages, but also for your trading. I have the ability to, if I want to go out back in the shed and pull out the generator and start it up and do whatever, I could power a, my router and all of that very easily, fridge and basic things like that. So, that kind of had me thinking that if I needed to, if the cell phone towers continued to be unresponsive or something like that, you have to have that backup. But yeah, that's, as a swing trader, very rare I'm sitting in 100% cash. Sometimes a lot of cash, but yeah, it's very rarely all cash.
Yeah, and this for me, it's easier to think about when I think about this right from the beginning as I'm creating my strategy. So I remember when I was creating the automation for some of the very first versions of the trade client years ago, or what ended up becoming the trade client. I knew that there were certain points in the process for using some APIs where if your power went off at this one specific instant, you
Hmm.
could be in trouble. You could have a position where the stop wasn't active. And I knew that, okay, that is very unlikely, but it could happen. And I would sort of stay awake at night thinking about these scenarios. And because the important thing to think about here is this is your path to confidence. Like this is a
Hmm.
huge part of it. Like you're thinking about what are the big risks that I'm not thinking about? What am I not considering that could happen that I'm not thinking about now? And how can I prevent it? And that was a big reason that I went to Interactive Brokers and used their API specifically because there's one very nice feature that I still don't see anywhere else. And that's, we talked about the timed exits last time. That's one thing,
Hmm.
but the way they do their orders, it's beautiful because basically there's the difference between a queued and a transmitted order. So you can queue orders and then transmit them once they're on the platform. So what that allows you to do is, and this is the way the trade client that comes with MaveKit works, your entry order is queued, all your exit orders are queued, and the
Hmm.
very last exit order is transmitted. And when you transmit it that way, all of them go live at the same time. So there's literally not a situation that can occur where your entry order is active, but your exit orders aren't. And that's built into the API. And that was a big reason I switched there because of that stability. Because just think about it. If my power goes out, I'm always protected. Like, okay, maybe I won't be
Yeah.
able to make new trades, but the trades that are already in there are just going to play out on IB's servers. So I'm not ever in a situation where I'm in a panic and need to have my power come on or my internet to come on or my router. I need to get a replacement router to make it work, right? So that's a huge thing. But that comes from thinking about that from the very beginning.
Well, yeah, and if we talk about, I guess, steps of complexity to solve this solution, that's like the bottom rung, is to make sure that on order entry, like you mentioned, there is held away from your machine, so held on their servers, a stop loss, and then, like you mentioned, some sort of timed exit. If you're day trading, if you're swing trading, it's less of a big deal. But that protective stop, even if there's no target or anything associated with it, at least that saves from like an absolute catastrophic event where you're short something even worse and it's just rocketing. You have that order that will just execute a market and away you go. So that's step one. And that's the first thing from the swing trading side of things that just made me feel totally fine is I had all these orders out. I've been in these positions, but they all have stop loss orders associated with them. And I'm not worried about that because it will just trigger at some point on its own. And it's all being held at my broker. It's not being held at my house. Like a meteorite could fall on my house, and at least these trades will get stopped out eventually. If I didn't have time stops associated with them, then they may not close on their own. But I'm not worried about, oh no, the power's out. I'm going to lose way more money or even like blow up an account or something based off of, one dumb thing that was not done by me. It was done by the bus driver.
Yeah. And I mean, in the area where I live in North Carolina, we have hurricanes. And I
Hmm.
remember very distinctly the power going out for a week when a hurricane came through.
Hmm.
It's been probably 20 years now, but um, these things can happen, and you need to think about it. And just because it's rare doesn't mean it's not going to happen. So, and those are the kind of things where you can avoid a big loss, and you have more risk on than you think.
Hmm.
And this is, like I said, this is a big part of a path to confidence, not having to worry about these things or controlling what you can actually control.
Well, so that bottom rung, that bottom layer, that's step one, and that stops the catastrophic, loss or event or something like that. But let's kind of go, I guess, up the complexity scale just a little bit, right? And say, okay, well, like you mentioned, if you couldn't trade for a whole week, well, right, that's unfortunate. So, you're missing a lot there. So, what would you kind of say? Because I've got some ideas for that next step. Assuming your house is completely out of power, and because it happens here too, it's usually like ice storms, things like that, that, weigh down the lines and can take, people can't physically go out to fix them because you're not going to go up on a ladder or one of those cherry pickers when there's an ice storm happening. So
Mhm.
2 to 3 days without power is actually pretty common. Probably happens a couple times a year.
It happens a couple times a year in Canada.
It has, I remember
Wow.
we had one year, like 2 years ago, where I think there was, yeah, probably three instances of a day, two, and then the longest one I think was 4 days without power
Wow.
from
Yeah.
hurricanes and ice storms and things like that.
So I used to live um, outside of town, lived there for many years, loved it. And it was on a different electrical uh, service. So there was one power company there. I've got a different power company now. Um, and there were definitely more power outages when I was out of town.
Hmm.
And now that I'm in town or closer to town, there's definitely a lot fewer. I have access to Google Fiber, so internet's a lot more reliable. So it has. I get that it's I'm probably going to jinx it here, but you know it's it's kind of a luxury to have this situation where I don't really have to think about it that much. And but if it did happen more often, I would think about it more, and the first thing I would do would be thinking about a virtual server and running
Host.
all the stuff on
Hmm.
a virtual server outside of your home. Now, because things are so reliable here, I don't do that. Um, I think that has some complexity. There's some cost there.
Hmm.
Uh, I just feel more comfortable not doing that now. But if I was in a different situation where certainly the power's going out 4 days in a row once a year, I would definitely be thinking about that.
Yeah, because that was kind of the next thing that I started to mill about. And I had done this for years just because I was working at Trade Ideas and it's a Windows only application. And then I had my Mac. So what I did is I just bought a cheap AWS server and I use that. The beauty of it is then for the job too, I was traveling a ton. And I was able to always connect and have interactive because um, with the trade ideas, the brokerage plus and all of that, you had to have those running. So I could have those trading all the time. And I replaced that with just having a PC at home. The reason I did that is because to get a VPS that is powerful enough
Yeah,
to do some of like the AI stuff and the back testing, whatever, it becomes like insanely expensive, right? Cheap VPSs or light VPSs, you could say, are actually really cheap. You can get something with a decent little processor and maybe 8 gigs of RAM, and it's relatively cheap, like less than $100 a month. And then, but to get something beefy, it is expensive. But that's actually exactly where my brain went. I said, okay, well, do I create, which just you're right, it becomes cumbersome because I've got my Mac for content creation and like personal stuff, and then I've got the PC there for back testing, and then do I have a whole other VPS? And the only purpose of that would be to trade, to store the back tester,
yeah,
and to store any trading related things. That to me seems like the ultimate solution. I don't know if it's the correct one, but it does seem like kind of the ultimate because then it's located generally if it's AWS, it's actually probably co-located across a bunch of different places in the
yeah,
world, and uh,
yeah.
you
And you
can be
can
very sure it's going to be up.
control where your workspace is, and that's what it's
Yeah.
called. So if you go to AWS, the service is called Workspace. Workspaces you can create.
Hmm.
Um, I'm sure there's other ones now. And at the time when I was really scaling up my trading, that wasn't an option, or I didn't know of any options. So, um, but yeah,
There are trading when I was looking at it because I've since then it was about a week. I think it was last week that this happened. I've been looking at them. There's a couple that are actually at least branded and marketed as trading VPSs for quants, and they actually come pre-installed with like interactive brokers. I think Amni Broker and a couple different things. You have to use your own licensing and everything. But what they advertise is that they're located like in I think it's New Jersey, next to the other ones. I don't know how huge of a difference that would make. Probably for especially for what I do, little to none. But that is very interesting that there are these things that are built for quant nerds like us that exist in and that's their whole business models. They just create these servers for people out there who want to trade and they want a VPS to do it. And I found this because actually there's a whole bunch of Australian people, right? So this could be a whole nother thing. I know the I talked to if you're Australian, I guess comment down below because I so many systematic Australian traders out there. I just it's a huge community, and I think it's because of the time zone and then also the difference. So you could be thinking about something like this for power outages or unexpected things, but also if you're on the other side of the world and you notice a bit of lag back and forth, it's something to look at anyway.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the other thing I was thinking about as you were talking there was you could split up the back testing and the real time trading,
Yeah.
just like I've suggested with Amber Broker and the uh, having a back testing database versus a real time trading database. Because the back testing is what's going to be the hog.
Hmm.
Um, it's going to be resource intensive. You need a lot of RAM. It'd be silly to pay for a VPS for that, I think, because you're going to have to pay for a certain amount of compute over the entire month. Where when you're backtesting, you're not backtesting solid the whole month. You're going in and out of backtesting. And
Yeah.
the other thing is you can do backtesting at your leisure. Time is not of the essence, so you can do it kind of any time. If the power goes out, well, okay, that's not a huge deal, right?
Yeah, and that was kind of what I was thinking is that it and just so like for the pricing of this to get a pretty big and even talking just like a basic quad core and like 32 gigs of RAM, it was like 400 or 500 bucks a month. So you just think
Yeah,
of the mechanics behind that. Well, you could buy your own PC in like 2 months that is that spec, or if 6 months, you could get an absolute beast in comparison. So yeah, it just becomes prohibitively expensive. And I think it's just because most people are using these VPSs as a way to right, be able to connect to their office and do documents and things like this. So there's probably not that other side of it. Even ones that I explored that I thought might be interesting from the gaming side of things, because there's a bunch of those as well. People who, they have a Mac and they want a PC game, and you can do that as well. They still aren't intensive enough in the stuff that we care about, which is like RAM and things like that. They're more into, yes, they're GPUs, right? They've got you're renting like Nvidia. I guess you can rent actually GPU usage and things like that, but it's just not what we need. So yeah, there's not a lot of options for that. So the next thing is I would say like you look at your house. I guess I don't know if you like have any backups inside that
yeah.
are interested for this.
So I've thought a lot about this, and because I didn't have a VPS option at the time when I was getting my trading really off the ground. Um, I would think about power. The two obvious ones, power. Well, there's actually three. Power, your computer,
Hmm.
and your internet. So you can have, a whole house generator to power your whole house. I didn't think that was worth it. What I thought was, okay, well, I've got these orders down pat. I'm going to live with, if the power goes out, just not being able to trade, hopefully the rest of the day or something like that. So I got a UPS, which is an uninterruptible power supply.
Hmm.
So it basically has a battery in it and it can power your computer for some period of time, 30 minutes, an hour, maybe. So I had one of those with my computer plugged into it. And I was like, okay, I feel better about this. Over time, though, my power, like I said, my power hardly ever goes out. It never really paid off in any way. You have to have software on your machine to communicate with the UPS, which is kind of a pain. You have to power it, like the battery goes dead sometimes. You have to
Hmm.
replace the batteries, how to do that. So it just became, and then comparing to the reliability of my power now, like, well, I'm just going to live without it if the power goes out. So But that is an option. You can have a UPS. That's a pretty inexpensive way
Yeah.
to have that covered. Um, so the other one is your internet. And one thing that I thought very hard about at the time, so I was using AT&T internet at the time. It was not super reliable. So internet outages were somewhat frequent.
Hmm.
I thought about having a backup internet service. And they actually make these routers that can connect to two internet services at a time. And you can toggle with like it can provide some redundancy. It's such you think about it, it's such a niche market. Like no, there's
Hmm.
not a huge demand for this thing. But at the time I did some research to see if this was feasible just for some more redundancy with what I was doing. I concluded that like let's say you're using one as the primary, it goes out, and then how quickly can like how seamless is it for it to recover and convert to the other one?
Yeah.
Turns out it's not that seamless. Like it may be a minute before things fail over.
So
Maybe
enough
you
for
have
everything
to
to kick out and
right. It's not
re-sign in and
yeah. So
yeah.
it's not at least at the time it was not perfect. So it didn't really seem like it was getting me that much. The other thing I thought about at the time was some of them will, I think some of them were smart enough to basically have two internet services going at the same time and using both of them simultaneously. So getting
Hmm.
more capacity. So that's sort of interesting also. But, and I'm sure there's a whole lot of complexities there. But it's something to think about. If you're, depending on your internet service, that is an option to think about. And I didn't go back and search for these devices. I'll have to go back and search for them again. Maybe put them in the show notes if I can find them. But they were. It was an interesting little rabbit hole to go down and imagine how I could put myself at ease a little bit more.
Yeah. So what I actually did is I reached out for the internet angle. I reached out to my internet service provider, and I have fiber here, which always surprises people because I live in the middle of the woods. But
Yeah.
um, they actually have, and I'm probably going to get because I mentioned I have a generator, right? I can get it out. It's not a house full house generator, but it's kind of if things really hit the fan, it can do some heaters and things like that because we have that problem. We're just not without power for a while. You know, we
Yeah.
can actually freeze to death out here. And but in there's actually ones that have a battery, so the same as the power supply that you talked about in the router itself. And because the router isn't that big of a battery hog, you can get it says 8 to 10 hours of consistent internet. So anything that's plugged in via Ethernet or even on Wi-Fi it will be able to connect even when the power is out because as long as that cable is not cut, then that's fine. So I thought about that as well. So I'm going to get that installed. So that would be enough that in theory, I could have actually still done this podcast, which is what we're talking about, and trade it. And that
Oh
leads me
yeah.
back to the computer because right now I use a MacBook for when it comes to like execution, things like that. I could do on that side of things. So like simple things like the basket trader for interactive brokers I use for my swing trades. I can have interactive brokers installed on the Mac and use that. What I'm talking to you right now is on them and it's on a laptop. So that's another thing to consider as well is that if instead of splitting it up with, you know, your big powerful kind of back testing thing and a VPS, maybe it is a back tester and a laptop. Maybe your laptop is then your execution thing because they have come a long way. It's not like old chunky giant laptops. And if it's only for execution, you wouldn't need an extreme beast. So even if not as your primary, maybe you have a laptop as a backup, and then to your internet point, tethering to your phone. So I intentionally have a different internet provider than I have a cell phone provider. So in this case, it sucked that the all the towers were overwhelmed, but probably maybe a half hour or so after we talked, that got alleviated because everyone was probably going on their phone at the same time to figure out what happened to the power. Um, and also the benefit of laptop is I could have just left, right? So in this situation, and the power outage was the guy backed into a pole, so anything on that circuit was out. But I could have just picked up my laptop, which has a backup ability to do the trades from it, and I could have just driven into a Starbucks or coffee shop or friend's house or whatever and open up the laptop and go from there. So start to think about these. There are the grand solutions of generators and all of this, but some of just the more little ones. Like I was talking to a trader who didn't even have his broker app on his phone. And I'm like, well, that just seems like even if you never use it, if it's there
Yeah.
and you can sign into it, that's just a note you can pick up your phone and exit trade. Like there's, you know, kind of look at how much of a pain and how much of a cost it's going to be versus, how much you can save it, right? Sending orders, server side, having a laptop that has the ability to do your trades, even if it's cumbersome to set up or whatever, and mobile things. That's, I think, the lowest hanging fruit that I think everybody, if you don't have right after you listen to this podcast, you should probably take care of those.
Yeah, I think yeah, most people could benefit from doing a little fire drill to like
Hmm.
maybe even pull the plug on their computer and see how what they would have to do, or at least simulate that and try to connect on your phone. How cumbersome is that going to be? Do you have the right things installed? What's it going to feel like? If you set up your phone as a hotspot and connect your computer to that, how's that going to look and feel? Like go through the motions of doing that when it's not an emergency situation and get that ironed out, because I'm sure there's going to be some things that you haven't thought about that
Yep.
you're going to have to step through, or like, get the authentication working, something.
Hmm.
There's going to be some steps that you hadn't thought about that are going to be easier to go through and document now, and it's not an emergency, so that you're prepared when that happens.
Yeah, and I think that is the ultimate solution is go downstairs to your basement at some point one day and just flip the circuit breaker to your office and go, okay, now what? How are
Yeah.
how are you going to function? And again, you could do that physically, or you could just do it mentally and say, okay, do I have? And it could be as simple as a little cheap Windows laptop, and all it has on it is these
Mhm.
things signed in, or I think I don't even know if mobile hotspots are even a thing anymore, but can you tether it reliably to your phone? Can you, right? All of these little things. And then look at where you are geographically. Like when I told Dave that we get constant power outages due to ice storms and stuff, he was surprised. So there might be somewhere that you guys look at that has perfect weather, and if so, invite me. The that you don't have to worry about this stuff, but and you say, oh, well, it's no big deal. But a bus hit a telephone pole. Like it wasn't raining that day. It's not like there wasn't any possible. It was I instantly. It's hilarious how I walked in the door and like I'm flicking the switch and the power's not working. And my brain went to, did I pay the power bill? It's like, I know the market was in a little bit of a drawdown there, but it wasn't that bad. But it's still in my brain. I'm like, it's not like they can just cut off the power without telling me. I'm like, did I not pay? But yeah, it's you. The point is, it can be completely, entirely out of your control. In kind of, there's nothing that it's not anything that you could predict because the weather's not bad. It could not be anything. But yeah, sometimes shit happens. I guess
Yeah.
the moral of the story, right?
Yeah. So, um, the other thing I was thinking as you were talking there, and your computer going down, let's say something happens to your computer. A big thing that I've started doing is keeping very good, very anal documentation about the things I install on my computer. So
Hmm.
I keep a very tight list of things that I had to do to get this computer up and running, every single step in meticulous fashion. And anytime I install something new, I go back and edit that same document. It says, okay, here's the thing I installed. So, you remember our episode about me buying a new trading computer
Yeah.
and the sort of the fiasco that was. So I ended up having to do that a couple times, like install a computer from scratch. Such a huge time saver. I got it down to where I could basically get the computer up from scratch in about 30 minutes with
Mhm.
everything the way I had it, including, security keys, layouts for Broker, like everything I need is in there. So, and if it's not, then that's a problem, and I need to go back and document that. So, it's just been very helpful, and um, it really just came out of just convenience because it was such a pain in the butt to go through and forget that I need to install this other thing that I don't realize I need until 2 or 3 days in.
Yeah.
But
The
it's going to come in very handy if your power goes out for 4 days, or your computer's out and it turns out you need a new one and you have to
Mhm.
install stuff from scratch. That's going to be very, very helpful.
Yeah, and two things there. One, that's a really good use for AI, right? I think even I haven't tried this, but I bet you even with Claude Code, you could go in and you could say document everything that I have on my computer. Make a backup, right? Write your own file of where to get this, and maybe even set a process that installs everything for you, right? Go to the web, grab these, these are the applications that we need in order to get going, and you could set up a process that all you have to do is go and type in a window and say go, and it just pops everything down on your computer
Yeah.
for you, and then you need to sign in. So that's a good one as well. And then another thing that I think is good that I've actually been doing a little bit here as well is because I have a Mac and I have something called Parallels, right? It's a way to run Windows on the Mac. You can do it with a bunch of virtual software, but I've been periodically having like a version of the Windows that I'm using on the computer actually saved somewhere so that in theory I could just load it up with this virtual software and everything should be kind of laid out the way it is. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense as well, just in case. And that could just be even your computer just explodes one day and you got to run down to your local Best Buy and buy something that's cheap laptop enough to get you by in the trading side of things until you rebuild what you actually need. You might just need a backup for a couple days.
Yeah. The other thing to think about here, this is probably the last thing that I will say, but the math for some of these decisions changes over time.
Hmm.
So, I mean, back when I was first trading, I was making some money, but it wouldn't have been enough to justify, having a huge redundant setup, right? But as time goes by and you scale up and all of a sudden you're making real money, the math can change. Like all of a sudden it could be worth it uh to go through and have the second internet connection, whatever it is. And the other thing that changes is tech changes. Like VPSs were not a thing when I was first starting this. It wasn't even really an option. Where
Hmm.
now it is. So maybe the math is different now. Maybe the technology is different. The options are available. So all those things change over time. So I would say maybe once a year at least.
Yeah.
Maybe when you do your taxes or something, or January 1 or something, go through and think about this, document your thoughts at the time, go back and revisit them periodically. Because, like I said, if you've been in this industry a while and you're serious about your trading, your profits are going to go up over time, or they should,
Hmm.
and the math is going to be completely different years from now than it is now.
Yeah, and it was, just to relate to that, the so many people when I worked at Trade Ideas and I would help out with some support sometime, there'd be so many people who come in and just go, "Oh, it's Windows only. I'm not interested." And I always go back to them and say, "You can get a pretty good, pretty cheap Windows like mini PC or desktop or something. You're talking back then, before the RAM crisis and everything. You're talking like $300, 300 bucks. You get a little tiny PC. It would run Trade Ideas and your broker fine. You'd be able to trade from it great, and then they would ho and hum about that cost.
Yeah.
And it's like the easiest way to say, okay, you are not a profitable trader yet. Because, if you're ho and humming about a $200 purchase to use a software that you believe will make you a better trader, that's less than one trade, right? The difference between having that thing and not having that thing. So you're right, is that if you're new or you're not yet profitable or whatever, don't worry too much about this. Just take the day off, right? Make sure you do the thing we talked about in the beginning where you have stop losses and all of that, but just take the day off and go and do something else. But yeah, when you get to the point that you're a six figure, right, high six figure, seven figure trader, now you're talking 1 2 day of interruption is a sizable amount of cash. And the way the universe works is your particular system will work the absolute best when the power's out. And
True.
that was the day that you would have been short when we're looking at car now down 80% in 2 days. That's the time that wouldn't have happened the day before, and it won't happen. So you have to think about these things because you never know when the money's going to come in, and if you don't have the backup, just the way the fates work, that will
Yeah, I
be the
mean,
day.
these incidents don't happen at convenient times. That's the
No,
problem. So
that's
yeah,
the
but it's worth thinking about this. And I remember, you know, not quite laying awake at night thinking about this, worrying about it, but it was something that was I spent a lot of time thinking about because I wanted to make it. I wanted to sleep well at night, and I wanted to make sure that if there's something that I could do to make my trading more robust, more reliable, I knew that that was a way that I could feel better about scaling up over time. And
mhm,
it's such an important part of that process. Um, I see it as, fundamental to that process, having that down pat and having a plan. It's sort of like having, a plan for a trading system. Like, what are you going to do for each fork in the road for this trade you're going to make? I mean, that's just so fundamental um, to good trading. I mean, I think this is the same sort of thing. Thinking about, okay, what could go wrong here, and am I risking something where I could and can I live with it? I mean,
mhm.
I think when you get down to it, you aren't going to be able to satisfy every bit of risk that you have or can think of, right? But
Right,
you can
of course.
minimize, I think, the big ones, and you'll need to make judgment calls about, okay, here's what I'm living with, and here's why, and here's what it would cost to alleviate that risk, and it's probably too much right now. So,
Yeah.
but thinking through that, I think is just very important.
Well, yeah, and you'll have a note for later, right? You'll have something for later saying, not worth it right now. Maybe when I make X amount, I buy the backup laptop or something like that. But again, great topic. It's a lot of the best topics I think come across the just through the ether of, oh yeah, that sucked. Let's talk about it with everyone and make sure you guys are prepared. So, take whatever step of this that you haven't done yet and make sure you please do it for when a bus inevitably hits a telephone pole near you. But as always, I'm Michael Noss.
And I'm Dave May. Talk to you next week on Line Your Own Pockets.